Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out my other socials for more. Enjoy. One day at a time, one step at a time, she was moving forward on her journey to becoming her true self. The next morning dawned bright and clear, sunlight streaming through the gaps in Pat's curtains. She stirred, slowly coming awake to the sound of Whiskers meowing insistently for breakfast. With a groan, she reached for her phone to check the time. 6:15 a.m., she'd slept through her alarm. Cursing under her breath, Pat stumbled out of bed. She had a shift at the store starting at 8, and she still needed to shower, do her makeup, and catch the bus. It was going to be a rushed morning. She hurried through her shower, barely taking the time to condition her hair. As she toweled off, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. Her body was changing, slowly but surely, thanks to the hormone treatments. Her skin was softer, her features subtly more feminine, but there was still so far to go. Pushing aside the mix of hope and impatience that always accompanied these observations, Pat focused on getting ready. She blow-dried her hair as quickly as possible, wincing as she caught a tangle. Her makeup routine was abbreviated, just enough foundation to even out her skin tone, a swipe of mascara, and a touch of lip gloss. Clothes were next. Pat rifled through her closet, settling on a pair of black slacks and a purple blouse. Professional enough for work, but still allowing her to express her femininity. She slipped on a pair of low heels. She was getting more confident in them, but still preferred to save the higher ones for special occasions. A glance at the clock told her she had just enough time to grab a quick breakfast before heading out. In the kitchen, she poured some kibble for the still-complaining Whiskers and popped a bagel in the toaster for herself. As she waited for her bagel, Pat checked her phone. There was a text from her mom reminding her about dinner that evening. Pat's stomach clenched slightly at the thought, but she pushed the anxiety aside. She'd deal with that later. Bagel in hand, Pat grabbed her purse and headed out the door. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of fall. As she walked to the bus stop, she found herself taking deep breaths, trying to center herself for the day ahead. The bus was crowded, as usual for this time of morning. Pat managed to find a seat near the back, squeezing in next to a businessman engrossed in his phone. As the bus lurched into motion, she closed her eyes, mentally preparing herself for work. The store was already bustling when Pat arrived. She clocked in quickly and made her way to the sales floor, nodding hello to her coworkers as she passed. Steve, the manager, was standing near the front, his face set in its usual scowl. "Pat," he called out as she passed, "I need you to take care of the new shipment in housewares, and make sure everything's properly labeled this time." Pat nodded, biting back a sigh. Steve had never been the most understanding about her transition, often forgetting to use her correct pronouns. But he was the manager, and she needed this job. "Yes, sir," she replied, heading towards the stockroom. The morning passed in a blur of unpacking boxes, arranging displays, and helping customers. Pat found herself grateful for the busy pace. It kept her mind off the impending dinner with her parents. Around lunchtime, she was approached by a customer, a middle-aged woman looking confused. "Excuse me," the woman said hesitantly. "I'm looking for, I'm not sure how to say this, but cookware for left-handed people. My daughter just moved out, and she's left-handed, and I want to get her some good kitchen stuff." Pat smiled, feeling a surge of warmth. This was the part of her job she loved, being able to help people, to make their day a little easier. "Of course," she said. "We don't have specific left-handed cookware, but I can show you some options that work well for both right and left-handed cooks. Would that be helpful?" The woman's face lit up. "Oh, yes, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much." As Pat led the woman through the kitchenware section, explaining the features of different pots and pans, she felt a sense of purpose. This was why she did this job, not for Steve's approval or even for the paycheck, but for moments like these. After helping the woman choose a set of cookware and some ergonomic utensils, Pat rang up her purchases. The woman beamed at her. "Thank you so much for your help," she said warmly. You've made this so much easier than I thought it would be." Pat felt a glow of satisfaction as she watched the woman leave. It was moments like these that made the difficult parts of her job and her life worthwhile. The afternoon dragged on, filled with the usual tasks of restocking shelves and assisting customers. By the time her shift ended at 5:30, Pat was exhausted. Her feet ached from standing all day, and her mind was already racing ahead to the evening's dinner with her parents. As she clocked out, Mike caught up with her. "Hey, Pat," he said. "A bunch of us are going out for drinks later. Want to join?" Pat hesitated. Part of her wanted nothing more than to relax with her coworkers, to be just one of the girls for a while. But she knew she couldn't bail on her parents. "Thanks, Mike," she said with a small smile. "But I've got dinner with my parents tonight. Rain check?" Mike nodded understandingly. "No problem. Good luck with the parents." Pat appreciated his support. Mike had been one of the first at work to fully accept her transition, never stumbling over her name or pronouns. It meant more to her than she could express. As she left the store, Pat checked her phone. There was a text from her mom asking if she could pick up a bottle of wine on her way over. She sighed, knowing this likely meant her dad was in one of his moods. Still, she stopped at the liquor store, selecting a decent Merlot that she hoped would help smooth over any rough patches in the evening. The bus ride to her parents' house felt all too short. As she watched familiar streets pass by, Pat found herself rehearsing potential conversations in her head. How to respond if her dad used the wrong name. What to say if her mom made another comment about her clothes. It was exhausting, but necessary. All too soon, she was standing on her parents' front porch. Taking a deep breath, Pat smoothed down her blouse and rang the doorbell. There was a moment of silence, then the sound of footsteps approaching. The door swung open, revealing her mother. There was a moment of hesitation, a flicker of something, surprise, disappointment, in her eyes as she took in Pat's appearance. Then she smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. Pam, she corrected herself quickly. "Come in, dear. Your father's in the living room." Pat stepped inside, handing over the bottle of wine. "Thanks, Mom. I brought this. I thought it might go well with dinner." Her mother took the bottle, examining the label. "Oh, that's thoughtful. Thank you." There was an awkward pause. Pat could feel her mother's eyes on her, taking in her outfit, her makeup. She resisted the urge to fidget. "Well," her mother said finally, "let's not keep your father waiting." As they walked to the living room, Pat steeled herself. These dinners were always a delicate balancing act, a dance of words left unsaid and emotions barely contained. But they were trying, she reminded herself. They were here. They had invited her, and that was something. Her father was sitting in his armchair, the TV tuned to a baseball game. He looked up as they entered, his expression unreadable. "Hello, Pat," he said gruffly. At least he hadn't used her dead name, Pat thought. That was progress of sorts. "Hi, Dad," she replied, settling onto the couch. "How are you?" He grunted noncommittally. "Fine. Work's busy. How's the store?" And so it began, the careful small talk, the avoidance of any topics too personal or potentially contentious. Pat answered questions about her job, asked about her father's work, commented on the baseball game. It was stilted, uncomfortable, but it was communication. Her mother bustled in and out, putting the finishing touches on dinner. Pat offered to help, but was waved off. No, you sit and talk with your father," her mother insisted, a hint of desperation in her voice. Finally, they were called to the dining room. The table was set beautifully, Pat noticed. Her mother had used the good china, the set that usually only came out for holidays. She wasn't sure if she should be touched by the effort or saddened by the implication that her visits were now special occasions rather than regular family dinners. As they settled into their seats, Pat's father cleared his throat. "So," he said, his voice gruff, "how's the transition going?" Pat nearly choked on her water. Her father had never directly asked about her transition before. She glanced at her mother, who looked equally surprised. It's going well," Pat said carefully. "I have a court date next month to legally change my name." Her father nodded slowly. "To Pam, right?" "Yes," Pat confirmed, feeling a surge of hope. "To Pamela, but Pam for short." There was a moment of silence as her father seemed to mull this over. Then he nodded again. "All right, Pam it is then." Pat felt tears prick at her eyes. It wasn't a full acceptance, not yet, but it was a step, a big step. Her mother, seeming eager to move past the moment, began serving the food. "I made your favorite," she said, placing a plate of lasagna in front of Pat. "Well, it was always Patrick's favorite, but I hope you still like it?" Pat smiled, touched by the gesture. "I do, Mom. Thank you." As they ate, the conversation gradually became less strained. Her parents asked about her work, and Pat found herself sharing stories about difficult customers and kind coworkers. She told them about the woman she'd helped find left-handed cookware and was pleasantly surprised when both her parents seemed genuinely interested. "You've always been good with people," her mother said, a note of pride in her voice, "even when you were little." Pat felt a warmth in her chest at the compliment. It was these moments, these small acknowledgments of who she was, not just who she had been, that gave her hope. As the meal wound down, Pat's father cleared his throat again. "Your mother and I," he began, then paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "We've been talking, and we want you to know we're trying. We don't always understand, but you're our child, and we love you." Pat felt tears welling up again, but this time she didn't try to hold them back. "I love you too," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And I know it's not easy. I appreciate that you're trying." Her mother reached across the table, taking Pat's hand in hers. "We're proud of you," she said softly. "It takes courage to be who you are." For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of the words settling around them. It wasn't perfect, Pat knew. There would still be stumbles, still be moments of confusion or hurt. But this was a beginning. As Pat helped clear the table after dinner, she felt a lightness in her chest that hadn't been there in a long time. The evening hadn't gone perfectly, but it had gone better than she'd dared to hope. Her mother insisted on sending her home with leftovers, packing up containers of lasagna and garlic bread. As Pat prepared to leave, her father approached her awkwardly. "Pam," he said, the name still sounding strange on his lips, but he was trying. "Drive safe, okay?" Pat smiled. "I'm taking the bus, Dad, but I'll be careful." He nodded, then, in a move that surprised them both, pulled her into a hug. It was brief and a little stiff, but it was real. "Good night, kiddo," he murmured. As Pat walked to the bus stop, she felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her. Hope, gratitude, a lingering touch of sadness for the ease they'd lost. But mostly, she felt loved. It wasn't perfect, but it was family, and for tonight, that was enough. The next morning, Pat woke up feeling more refreshed than she had in weeks. The dinner with her parents, while not without its awkward moments, had left her with a sense of hope that she hadn't felt in a long time. As she went through her morning routine, she found herself humming softly, a small smile playing on her lips. Whiskers wound around her ankles as she made her way to the kitchen, meowing insistently for breakfast. Yes, I know," Pat chuckled, bending down to scratch behind the cat's ears before filling his bowl. "You're always hungry, aren't you?" As she waited for her coffee to brew, Pat scrolled through her phone. There was a text from Mike asking how dinner with her parents had gone. She typed out a quick reply, sharing the positive outcome. His response was immediate and enthusiastic, full of exclamation points and smiley face emojis. Pat smiled, grateful once again for his unwavering support. It was her day off from the store, but Pat had a full day planned. She had an appointment at the gender clinic in the afternoon, and before that, she'd promised herself she'd tackle some much-needed cleaning around the apartment. After finishing her breakfast and giving Whiskers a final pat, Pat set about her cleaning tasks. She put on some upbeat music and lost herself in the rhythm of dusting, vacuuming, and organizing. It felt good to bring order to her living space, almost like a physical representation of the clarity she was slowly finding in her life. As she was sorting through a pile of mail on her coffee table, Pat came across a letter she'd been avoiding. It was from her health insurance company regarding coverage for her transition-related care. With a deep breath, she opened it. To her surprise and relief, the letter was largely positive. While not everything was covered, more procedures were approved than she'd dared to hope for. Pat felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It wasn't everything, but it was a start, another step forward on her journey. Energized by the good news, Pat finished her cleaning with renewed vigor. By the time she was done, the apartment was spotless, and she still had a couple of hours before her appointment at the clinic. Pat decided to use the extra time to treat herself to a relaxing bubble bath. She filled the tub with hot water, adding a generous amount of lavender-scented bath oil. As she sank into the warm water, she felt the tension in her muscles begin to melt away. Closing her eyes, Pat allowed her mind to wander. She thought about the dinner with her parents, replaying the moments of connection and understanding. She thought about the letter from the insurance company and the possibilities it opened up. And she thought about her upcoming appointment at the clinic, wondering what new steps might lie ahead in her transition. The sound of her phone buzzing on the bathroom counter jolted her out of her reverie. Reaching out with a damp hand, Pat checked the screen. It was a text from Sarah, her best friend since college. "Hey girl, how'd dinner go last night? Want to grab coffee later and dish?" Pat smiled, warmth blooming in her chest. Sarah had been her rock throughout this entire journey, never wavering in her support. She quickly typed out a reply. "Dinner went surprisingly well. Can't do coffee today. Have an appointment at the clinic. But tomorrow?" Sarah's response came almost immediately. "Tomorrow it is. Good luck at the clinic. Love you." Pat set her phone back down, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over her. She had lost some friends when she came out, but the ones who stayed, like Sarah, had become even closer. As the bathwater began to cool, Pat reluctantly got out and wrapped herself in a fluffy towel. She wiped the steam from the mirror and studied her reflection. Her face was flushed from the hot water, her hair damp and curling at the ends. She could see the changes in her features, subtle but undeniable. The hormones were doing their work slowly but surely. Pat took her time getting dressed, choosing her outfit carefully. She settled on a floral sundress, feminine but not overly fussy, and a light cardigan. As she applied her makeup, she kept it subtle, just enough to enhance her features without looking overdone. Once she was ready, Pat gave Whiskers a final pat and headed out. The clinic was across town, and she wanted to give herself plenty of time to get there. As she walked to the bus stop, she felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. These appointments always left her feeling a bit raw, exposed, but they were necessary steps on her journey. The bus ride gave her time to gather her thoughts. Pat found herself making mental notes of questions to ask the doctor, issues to bring up. She was so lost in thought that she almost missed her stop, scrambling to get off at the last second. The clinic was housed in a nondescript office building. As Pat entered the waiting room, she was struck, as always, by the diversity of the people there. There were other trans women like herself, but also trans men, non-binary individuals, people of all ages and backgrounds. It was a powerful reminder that she wasn't alone in this journey. Pat checked in with the receptionist and took a seat, pulling out her phone to distract herself from her nerves. She scrolled through social media without really seeing it, her mind racing ahead to the appointment. "Pamela?" a voice called. Pat looked up to see a nurse smiling at her. "Dr. Chen will see you now." As she entered Dr. Chen's office, Pat felt a sense of calm settle over her. This was another milestone on her journey, another step towards becoming her true self. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my other socials if you want more wonderful content, early access, behind the scenes, and more. All links down below.